I wanted to talk about this concept that I've been sharing so many videos around my own story, and I've been doing it. It's been challenging, but I want to do it to share with you what it can look like when you're living in this sort of trauma trance. You're walking around masking your trauma and you have no idea. And one of the ways I really kept the trauma going from my childhood all the way till I was almost 50 was through the trauma bond I remained in with my mother. And many of you have watched my videos, but if you haven't and you're new, welcome. I realized even with a master's degree in psychology, I did not understand that my mother, who I do believe has undiagnosed borderline at a minimum, I'm just saying at a minimum, I'm not going to go through other things I think that she struggled with, but did not have an identifiably traumatic childhood. I mean, who can say what is trauma to somebody? But the point is that I do believe that those dynamics, being an only child, her having really, me not really having other family, it being this very intense bond was a big reason why I chose the partner I chose, why I stayed in trauma, why I in many parts stayed a little girl and not able to fully, not little girl like I wasn't functioning, but stayed a little wounded girl inside until I really accepted that these very hurtful patterns of behavior by her, very, very bad patterns, were hurting me. So I want to share today, and I know I've made other videos, but I'm trying to keep this on this topic through the lens of what a trauma bond can look like. Now, this can be with anyone. It could be with family, with friends, with partners. I am really talking about it through the lens of a parent in this video, but it could apply to anyone. So what I want you to get about a trauma bond is the heart of it, no matter who it's with, is really about intermittent reinforcement. And you're like, what is that again? That is a schedule of behavioral reinforcement where it's like gambling. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But when you go, let's say, to Vegas, what keeps you at the table longer is that you lose, 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 win, 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 lose, win, lose, 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 win, right? It's like that hooks our brains in. It's a very addictive type of schedule of reinforcement. And with parents like this, where I always say the hardest ones, and I think this is for the most common, is when you get good love and bad love. They're sometimes good, sometimes really bad. And if that's all you've ever known, love looks like that inside, especially if that was a parent, that becomes the template for your whole life in relationships, right? Love is equally good and equally hurtful. Love is not safe because you cannot have true safety with a parent who is like this, where they're upset with you, mad at you, love you, adore you, hate you. You just can't. I don't care what anyone tells you. And I know it's complicated because is love, our love and safety, must they hold hands? It becomes very complicated. Because it's love. I do believe that those who struggle with disorders like borderline, they love you. And I'm talking about untreated, undiagnosed, unaware, because there's a very big difference in those who are aware and working and getting support, or at least trying. And I want to keep making that distinction. Also, please remember, if you are younger and watching this channel, that the way we have looked at borderline and outside of the last few years was very stigmatized. And even in my programs, it made it seem like it was a very rare thing that you would have a patient with borderline, that you should not work with them, that they would be dangerous, that you would recognize it. It was like this caricature, like extreme version of a crazy woman, to be honest, that you see in media. I'm talking about crazy in the media, like in movies. And that, it might look like that, but it often doesn't. It often looks like wonderful, loving, beautiful humans who struggle with emotional and relational dysregulation, but to extreme levels. And they also struggle with identity issues and impulsivity, a lot of other things, which you can watch many videos here, other places on having borderline. But the problem is that if you're unregulated a lot of the time and love is threatening to you or conditional to you, or you feel easily wounded even by your own children, and then you blow at them, or you shut down, or you neglect them, or whatever it is, as a child, that is unsafe. So the heart of a trauma bond is about lack of safety. It's about intermittent reinforcement. It is about the cycle of abuse. And it is about guilt, shame, and chronic hypervigilance. Because you're hypervigilant. Why? Because you don't know when the good or bad love is coming, but you have to pay attention and know that the bad love will come. So the good love is what keeps you in the trauma bond, right? What makes it a trauma bond is that it's good and bad, good and bad, good and bad. So what are the signs that you are in a trauma bond with a parent, a partner, a friend, a lover, whatever it is? That is really what we're talking about, is the cycle of abuse. And really quickly, let's go through the cycle of abuse. The classic cycle of abuse starts with, and it can go in different orders and move around, but that, let's say we're in a relationship, right? And you have a form of whatever's going on with you that makes you unsafe over time, eventually, or consistently, I should say, right? And inherently is a better word. So let's say you're my parent and you have a bad day at work and you come in the door and I can feel, because I'm hypervigilant, I can feel the tension. You slammed your purse and keys on the counter. You said, "Who fed the dogs?" Right? It's like, oh God, there's tension building. And let's say you're that parent and you're like, oh, I've been kind of cranky. So you try to turn it down, but there's a tension. It's like, I'm like, okay, there's something happening. There's energy here that's negative. That starts to rise. And let's say over the course of the night, that same night the parent comes home, that was at like 5:30. At 9 o'clock, or it's been several days. You've been cranky for several days. It could be all in the same day. It could be in the same month. But then you blow up, right? You come in the room. You say, did you do your homework yet? Or whatever. Or why has the dog not been walked? And for some reason, that's what makes you blow. And you start raging and you're angry and mad. So there's an incident, right? There's an incident. And how that plays out can vary. Mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever. Then the parent, the parent who did that night or the next morning writes you a sorry note or gives you the silent treatment, but by the next day they apologize. Or the partner, I'm so sorry, I blew up on you, I love you, I don't know what's wrong with me. Or they don't apologize, but they just act like things are fine and you're so desperate for it to be fine that you all act like nothing happened, right? So there's like a reconciliation, that's called. We reconcile in some way. So, and then it becomes sort of like calm again for a little while. Now we're kind of in the good love. Now I'm kind of feeling like, okay, I forgave you. I try to justify it, minimize it. But what happens next week, this weekend, the tension starts to rise again. So tension, incident, reconciliation, calm. Okay, so that's happening. So that's inherent in the trauma bond. So like, for example, with my mom, you know, as I've talked about, we would move her with us. So, I mean, literally my first year of marriage, we moved from California back to Austin, where I'd moved from Texas and had not been there since I was 23. So this is like somewhere around like 30. She has a blow up with her boyfriend. She has nowhere to go. She had followed me to California. I'd brought her with me to California at 23. She comes to Austin, our first year of marriage. And every time she would live with us, she would come in, she would start helping me, and we would spend time together because my partner was never around. It would be really good. And then the tension would start to build. She would start feeling unappreciated. That was a huge trigger for her. She would blow and say terrible and hurtful things. I would, feel bad, whatever. It would calm down, and then it would happen again. And it would happen, and then when it got really bad, she would suddenly find a place to move. And this happened like 4 or 5 times in our marriage over the course of 11 years, 12 years. She would live with us for, because we would move a lot. So she would come with us to the next move. And I'm talking about like the Southern California, Northern California. The point was, things would be good. She'd help with the kids. She'd be there, help with moves. I'd pay for everything and, try to give her support for that because I was benefiting with the help. I thought that there was a huge price to pay. But every single time it would end up it would blow and it would be extremely hurtful. And the names she would call me, the things she would say, the accusations. And so that cycle went on and on and on. That was the trauma bond. But when it was good, it was great, right? And so that's the thing I want you to keep in mind. So what do? You justify, you minimize the bad behavior. You feel helpless to change the behavior. Like, well, I can't just get rid of my mom. That's my mom or my dad or my grandmother, whatever it is. It's like you feel like you have no power to change the pattern. And no matter how you talk to them and try to work it out, if you do, they might own their behavior, they might deny, they might minimize, but it never changes. You feel like it's your job to help them, fix them, solve their problems, pay for them, support them, whatever it is. You make excuses and you defensively protect yourself even against really facing the reality of who they are. Because think about how hurtful that is if it's your own parent. If you start to really accept that this person who's my parent hurts me more than anyone else, then you'll have to, most of us, do something about that. And so you might not be ready for that answer or truth. So to others, you're like, oh, well, she's had trauma, or he had trauma, or they had trauma. Or, oh, they're really struggling too. Oh, they're, going through menopause, which all those things are true and they deserve some allowance, but they cannot be a free pass to hurtful behavior again and again and again. Basically, you find ways to feel like you can't share your truth with others because it's embarrassing, so you leave out certain parts of the story. You don't, you find yourself not only being defensive, but protecting the truth of what's happening. Or maybe you just forget about it and deny it and minimize it to yourself. Others in the world can reinforce, like, well, I know she said that, but that's your mom, right? It's like the world, especially when it's your partner, your kids, your whatever, your parents, no matter what's happening, I mean kids, your adult children, but whatever it is, the world says, well, that's family. Under no circumstance are you allowed to set a boundary with an abusive family member. They're family. And so you're getting all these messages like, well, the world is saying, like, that's my mom, so like I can't make her leave or stop talking to her. So the world reinforces the trauma bond. There's a power imbalance in some way, like, oh, I need my parents' love, or I need their money, whatever it is. There can be these different parts that keep you in it. It can be their inheritance that you think you're going to get. I've seen people stay for those reasons. It can be because they help with your kids, and yet there's a huge price to pay for that, because eventually they will often do the same things to the grandchildren. Whatever it is, there's a need, a power dynamic there oftentimes, or a need imbalance. You basically are, at the core, often a fawner, a people pleaser, or a compulsive caretaker. And that is how you were set up to deal with people. So that's kind of like in your DNA. And so that dynamic in you keeps you in it and keeps you in the trauma bond and accepting it. You are often extremely, like I said, at the core hypervigilant. And the eggshell dynamic, walking on eggshells, is something that you've always had to do with this parent or parents or your family. And so you're just so good at doing that it's just like, well, yeah, I walk on eggshells. Like, you don't even see it as walking on eggshells because it's so part of the trauma bond. You ignore the bad behavior. You hyper-focus on the good days. Oh, we had a great trip, or they were great here, or at this dinner they didn't yell at anybody. It was so great. We had, or they help you. They're there for you. You're always thinking that, if I could just get them to understand or go to therapy or whatever, it will change. And if it's a true trauma bond and they are truly in some form of difficulty in life where they don't have the capacity to have the insight or interest in changing, you'll just be on the hamster wheel, right? You just keep thinking that if I show them this, or I do this loving thing, or I model good behavior, or whatever, it doesn't work. And I can say we even, like I've mentioned, tried therapy with her, and she screamed at the therapist and walked out of the room. And it was, they're the bad therapist, which I've been told as well. When you have those type of parents and the adult child starts to change and heal, it's not usually well received. And I've got broad shoulders for that, so I'm okay with that one. And then they basically will do things like, whether it's love bombing, hoover you, whatever it is, they find ways to kind of keep you in it. And so, in many cases, they'll even apologize to keep you in it. But the core of the trauma bond is that what all of that does is it keeps you stuck in reenacting the story for many of us of our childhoods. And what I've said is that had I understood how detrimental that staying, no matter how good it could be, no matter how much I would need her, and at times when the kids were really little, she could be helpful, that there would always be a price to pay. And as I've shared in also many videos, that one of the last straws, I wish it was the last straw, it was one of the first time we had a real separation was when I was 9 months pregnant with my third son. And Christmas morning, my mom walked out. I'm literally 9 months pregnant, about to have my third baby, and we did not open her gift first. And she had recently moved out. We'd had a whole live with us all these months. She had moved out, so we were still in that kind of not great phase. And she just walked out Christmas morning, as we were like little, a toddler and an infant, like opening, presents, and like I was a wreck, And so the point is that went on and on and on. And then when I had my son without her being there, she was mad about that. And the night before I had him, I had written her a letter after this incident, right before he was born, trying to work things out with her, once again, trying to make change. And the night before my scheduled C-section, which got bumped up early, I went to get the mail, all 9 months of me, pregnant of me, and she had returned a letter unopened in an envelope that said, "I will not read this." Like, I can't remember now what it was, but she had written on it and included my unopened letter inside. And if you know me, the part of the problem was back then, I don't even remember what I wrote, but it would have been very accommodating, very, overly loving, overly trying to like get her to see how much we loved her. And if she could just understand that this was hurtful, it wouldn't have been a harsh boundary setting letter. Like I may have said like, you can't keep doing this, but it would not have been something I would write today. It devastated me. So the point is, if I had understood even back then, and that same son is 19 now, that one that was born, and I went on years and years and years afterwards, just because that was what love looked like. So if you have been born into a trauma bond and raised by a trauma bonding parent, to me, you're that much more likely to stay with the trauma bond in that parent, and or also be in a trauma bond or choose a partner that reenacts those dynamics. And I know it makes no sense. We think, but that's the last thing I want, and it might look completely different on the outside, but deep inside feel the same way. And so if I had known that and understood how damaging it was to my psychological functioning and my well-being, it would have affected my parenting, my sense of self, my self-compassion, my marriage, what I did or didn't do. If I'd understood not just like what was happening with she and I, but the damage it did to me, how much it impacted my capacity to show up as the person I wanted to be in good and strong, healthy ways, it would have been life-changing. Because in my mind, love was always dangerous and always came with a price and was never going to be safe. And if that is your template for the world, it makes it really difficult to choose and stay in healthy relationships. So anyway, that's it. Please feel free to share if you want to your feelings down below, your thoughts, and understand that if you're in this situation now, you're not alone. If you are in it now, like if I had seen this video, ideally this is why I make these videos, back when I had that whole thing, I would have researched more, read about my childhood, understood the impact of intermittent reinforcement and trauma bonds, and I would have really worked with a therapist on how to start to set changes with her at that point. I don't think they would have lasted, but I don't really know. So the first thing is to identify, make awareness with yourself about it, and start to do the work, get support, seek those who can help you, therapists, friends, whatever. Read books on, toxic families and setting boundaries, inner child work. All of that is incredibly important. And that really is the reason why I've made, and I know I don't really advertise them, and I really should be, which is the courses I've made on remothering, on the free course, and on the course that really is about everything it took for me to understand that I had been raised by parents who struggled with borderline and narcissism disorders, and how much it affected my sense of self and my life and relationships. I would have honestly done everything it could have taken to understand that, because it would have truly maybe shaved off 10 more years of suffering in my life if I'd understood that. But, we get there when we get there. But the whole point of this is that all of that is so deeply impactful that if you were raised, especially by parents who really, to me, are the core of EGGSHELL, which would be those who have some form of the qualities that can exist in untreated and undiagnosed NPD, borderline, bipolar, and even autism, right? At this point, I think that I'm starting to think about how much could a dysregulated person who was high masking, especially, who struggled with, social cues or those types of things, how much that could also affect parenting. And so regardless of what the label is, I think the label gives us a chance to say it's not my fault, but I don't want to use the label in a pathologizing way. But I think there's power in saying, oh my gosh, when I realized my mom had borderline, for example, and my father, I believe as well, who had a lot of trauma, I was like, oh my God, I'm not the bad child. It's not me. Because that is what we often carry, is that it's our fault and there's something wrong with us. So anyway, once again, a longer video than I anticipated, but I'm trying. I just don't know how to do it. Shorter versions. I hope it was helpful. Please stay safe and well, and I will see you soon. Okay.